If you enjoy our work, consider making a donation to mixtapestories.net or at Patreon/mixtapestories, all one word. Thank you. Mixtape Stories, creating beautiful fiction in a disappointing timeline.
Hey travelers, we're hard at work creating more stories to be released this fall. In the interim, I'll be doing a couple of retrospectives like I did last summer. I'd like to kick off this retrospective with the movie 2010, The Year We Made Contact, the film adaptation to Arthur C. Clarke's 1982 novel 2010 Odyssey 2. So let's get to it. It's 1984. Mary Lou Retton is the darling of the Los Angeles Summer Games. Ronald Reagan wins re-election in a landslide. And everybody's saying that they ain't afraid of no ghosts. And in the waning days of one of the most 80th years in the 1980s, MGM released 2010, The Year We Made Contact, the sequel to 2001, A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, which is about as 60s as you can get. A lot has changed in the 16 years since Stanley Kubrick's seminal masterpiece. The Beatles broke up, a lot of hippies had become yuppies, and science fiction has become a hot item in Hollywood. A lot of credit for that goes to the Star Wars franchise, of course, but really 2001 was the first movie where science fiction was taken seriously. 2010 was not going to try to replicate the original. We have a new director with Peter Hyams, and instead of trying to blow our freaking minds, the sequel with its more contemporary and more toned-down feel aimed to tell a more conventional drama. It goes without saying that this episode contains more spoilers than the meat rotting in the galley of the Discovery. So let's dive in. The story starts with a report of the events taking place in 2001, dated December 9th, 2001, by Dr. Heywood Floyd, the NCA chairman, which has to be a typo for NASA. Nothing grabs an audience like an executive summary typed up on a pre-Windows command line interface, let me tell you. And then we see Dr. Floyd himself out in the desert cleaning the radio telescope dishes. I think he wanted us to believe that he was out there to clear his head, but more likely it's because he insisted on calling himself the NCA chairman when we know he meant NASA. Dr. Floyd is played by Roy Scheider, who we know from Jaws. There is nothing related to Jaws here. I just wanted you to know that I did my Wikipedia research, so you know that I'm really trying here. Ooh. I know, but you guys are worth the effort. Anyway, an extraordinarily Russian guy named Morseyevich approaches Dr. Floyd right when he's about to finish his fifth dish of the array. Embarrassed, Dr. Floyd spins some yarn about being, the chancellor of the university. But Morseyevich can tell by the quality work of the cleaning that Dr. Floyd isn't doing this for exercise. The mouth-breathing Russian saunters up, and Floyd decides to listen to what he's got to say. Morseyevich has got some intel to share. The Soviets, and yes, they're still called the Soviets in this alternate timeline where there's a monolith, moon bases, rotating space stations, and Pan Am still exists. Well, the Soviets, they're going to launch the Leonov to explore the giant monolith in orbit around Jupiter and learn what happened to the supercomputer HAL on the Discovery. The Soviets know that the Americans are building another ship called the Discovery 2, because things went so well with Discovery 9 years earlier that they would call another ship the Discovery. Morseyevich, being the wily, beady-eyed Russian that he is, plants the idea that the Soviets could take the Americans with them.
We are going to get there first. Yet you have the knowledge to make the trip work.
And Floyd's like,
how could you convince your people to allow Americans to go on the flight?
It won't be easy. However, I'm pretty good. A Russian craft flown by Russians, carrying a few poor Americans who need our help.
now understand that the US and the Soviets are locked in a bitter Cold War. And this despite the fact that Rocky defeated Ivan Drago and gave the punch-drunk, inspiring speech at the end of Rocky IV.
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change.
Inspiring words from a man who knows how to box. But then Floyd's excitement is tempered when he realizes that his own people don't see the urgency in going. Morseyevich counters with,
Have you checked Discovery's orbit lately?
What?
Have you checked the orbit?
What about it?
and then he conveniently complains about his asthma and waddles off, leaving Dr. Floyd hanging. Dr. Floyd then confirms that Discovery's orbit around Jupiter's moon Io is degrading, and there's absolutely no explanation. It's going to crash in 2 to 2.5 years, and with it, the answers to what happened. Seeing this as his chance to leave the dish cleaning from the desert, Floyd manages to get someone to do the dishes for him and flies to DC on a very suborbital flight on Spirit Airlines. It's no Pan Am where the sky's no longer the limit, but it'll get you there. Eventually. Which is Spirit Airlines' slogan back when they were in business. Spirit Airlines will get you there eventually. Unfortunately, Spirit only flies into BWI, and someone stole Floyd's luggage, which explains why Dr. Floyd is still wearing earth tones in order to blend into the desert when he's chatting with Victor Milson in the park outside of the White House. This was filmed back when people could just have lunch outside of the White House. Milson, the current NASA chairman, patiently listens to Floyd as he tells him about his ordeal on flying on Spirit, being stuck in the middle seat between two Samoan wrestlers, and he eventually gets around to telling Milson about his idea of sending some Americans to join the Soviets, and that he needs to be on that mission because he feels personally responsible for the loss of the crew of the Discovery 9 years earlier. He has to find out what happened. Milson weighs the options. He doesn't want to advise the president, who's a reactionary in a bitter Cold War, to ask the Russians to give the Americans a ride with them. And who's going to clean the radio dishes? But Floyd argues that if they don't go along with the Russians will have all the answers. Side note, if the events taking place are in 2010, and the journey to Jupiter takes about 2.5 years, and that's not counting prep time, then I figure that all of this is taking place around 2007 or 2008, the latest. There's no point here, I just like you to know this. In any case, the president agrees. 3 Americans will go. One of those chosen to go on a mission is Dr. Chandra, the developer of HAL 9000. He's played by Bob Balaban, who was a researcher in Close Encounters. We see Dr. Chandra breaking the news to Hal's sister Sal that he plans to install Windows Vista on her and see the effects. He also mentions that he'll be away for the next several years to go on the mission to the Discovery to revive Hal, and asks her to record The Biggest Loser while he's away. God, you have no idea how difficult it is to make snarky references from the 2000s. I mean, it's like my brain decided that this decade didn't even exist. Anyway, it's dinner time in the early 21st century, and the Floyds are having spaghetti, and the Dolphins have been invited to stop by. When I saw this when it came out, I figured dolphin cohabitation would become a regular thing by 2003 or so, seeing as the Floyds don't really react to the dolphins chilling near the Floyds' living room. Outside of the visiting dolphins and the pool that reaches up to the dining table, everything else there in the house has a sort of retro 80s feel, from the glass dining room table to Dr. Floyd's younger wife's haircut. This is really forward thinking on Chaim's part because we really did go through a retro 80s phase in the 2000s. Floyd tells his non-age appropriate wife, Caroline, I think, that he's going on the flight in 4 months. She's not happy with this because this is what he always does. Whenever he sends a ship to explore an alien artifact out in deep space and the ship goes dark after the onboard AI kills the entire crew and the ship is left adrift over a volcanic moon. Then we get the Dr. Haywood Floyd montage. As required by law in the 1980s, you needed to have a montage. So we see him jogging in the desert with his little boy, working on a very old laptop on a beach, and I think we see him doing his taxes, and then we see Dr. Floyd speaking unintelligible whispers with Caroline before the lights go out. And you know what happens then.
Say you.
Flash forward 2.5 years, and it's 2010. Barack Obama is president, people are replacing their flip phones for smartphones, and Lost reveals to us that J.J. Abrams' idea of the mystery box plot was all a bunch of horseshit with no follow-through. Dr. Floyd is awoken from hibernation by Dr. Rudenko because I don't think you can be too Russian in this film. And before I can finish that sentence, in walks the commander, played by none other than Helen frickin' Mirren.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
I don't ever catch the commander's name. Yeah, it's Tanya Kubrick, but I only know that because I have Wikipedia. The rest of the crew doesn't know her name either. But since they're way out near Jupiter, they don't have any internet service. So they just end up calling her commander and hope that she'll properly introduce herself when Floyd wakes up, which she doesn't. So you got Dr. Floyd and Helen Mirren and the rest of the Soviets in the conference room, and are trying to decide should they call this year 2010 or 2010. Which is a real conundrum because, in the previous decade, you just say 2008, 2001. But once you hit the teens, you really should start using 20. You really start to sound like an old man when you say 2020. The discussion eventually winds its way to the reason why they woke up Floyd in the first place. Because they discovered something on Europa. And it is here in this movie theater when I was a kid that I discovered that Europa is not just a rock band. It also happens to be the name of an ice moon of Jupiter. They send a probe to explore this anomaly, and this is where we see how space is portrayed differently from the previous movie 2001. Instead of the realistic, soundless vacuum that Kubrick went for, Chaim instead gives space a cavernous ambiance. As the probe nears the icy surface of the moon, there's now an indication of chlorophyll, which should be impossible. It descends closer and closer to the surface until it's just meters away, or yards if you're a good American, when suddenly the probe explodes. The Soviets, being godless communists that they are, give a scientific explanation for the explosion: electrostatic buildup. But Floyd, our red-blooded American, who has no engineering background but who did stay the night at a Holiday Inn Express, believes that something wants us to stay away from Europa. By the way, this is the first movie that uses inertia as a thing. You see, they wanted to send another probe, but the commander, who I'm just going to call Helen Mirren, objects, saying it would take fuel to slow down. As a kid watching this was the first time that I realized that Newton wasn't just talking shit. That no, really, things in space tend to stay in motion once set in motion. It's commonly used in TVs and movies today, but back in 1984, I know I wasn't the only one learning some physics that day. Speaking of keeping things in motion, the Leonov needs to slow itself down and get into an orbit around Jupiter. Using Jiffy Pop technology, they pop a bunch of corn on a thing called a balut to shield the Leonov and aerobrake, skimming the outer atmosphere of Jupiter to slow down into an orbit. Once they're in orbit, they wake up the other two Americans. Dr. Chandra, who we already met, he's the U-break I fix guy for Hal. And the other American is the original Discovery engineer, Kurnow, played by John Lithgow.
My God, it's full of stars.
The Americans huddle, trash-talking the Soviets' lack of customer service, and Floyd explains how tensions between the U.S. and the Soviets are just getting worse. Something to do with a naval blockade near Honduras, and the Soviets trying to run it. The Leonov makes its way over to the Discovery, which is spinning slowly over Io and is covered in red volcanic ash. It's visually stunning, seeing the Discovery, as we knew it, spin in a strange concert with the Leonov's habitat section and covered in red. Kurnow and a friendly Russian named Max make their way over to the Discovery via a spacewalk, and I remember it feeling just as frightening as Kurnow feels it is. At some point, Kurnow loses his shit, but Max calms his partner down. He plays some Coldplay and thins his mixture. They make their way along the spine of the ship, and when they enter the Discovery, it appears that there's breathable atmosphere. So Max decides to lift his faceplate up to see if there is atmosphere on board the ship and that it's breathable, which I am told is standard policy in Roscosmos. Max notices a strange smell, like someone has died. And now it's Max's turn to make use of the spacesuit underwear, as he believes it's the dead bodies from the Discovery. But Kurnow assures him that Bowman ejected the bodies, and that it's likely the meat in the galley gone bad before it froze. The two develop a bond in this moment, as they work to get the Discovery back up and running. A bridge of sorts is set up between the Discovery and the Leonov, both practical and symbolic, as the two Cold War adversaries travel together to reach the gigantic monolith. When they reach the monolith, Helen Mirren figures the best course of action is to, rather than send an unmanned probe, to instead send Max, because she's freaking insane. Max does the brave thing, hops in the pod, nears the gigantic monolith, and it goes about as well as you would expect as it blows up and his remains are shot all the way back to Earth. Which is a great segue to go back to Earth. We're in some rando lady's kitchen watching a news program about the escalating tensions between the US and the Soviets when suddenly David Bowman appears on the screen. You remember David Bowman. He was the lone survivor from 2001 who went to the monolith, had that trippy experience, and we never seen or heard from him again. But look at him now, all up on the TV. And the lady is his wife, Betty. And Betty's like, oh shit, this is really awkward because I just took down David's photo 2 days ago. During the commercial break, he tells her something wonderful is going to happen, which is really cryptic and oddly not reassuring. He leaves just in time for her to return to her favorite show, The Real Housewives of Tycho. Back to our friends around Jupiter, the mood is dour after Max's death. On the Leonov, Helen Mirren and Dr. Floyd commiserate over some contraband whiskey, while over on the Discovery, Dr. Chandra wipes the internet search history out of respect for the deceased and reboots Hal. We learn why Hal malfunctioned, and it wasn't because of the Windows 95 update as we initially assumed it would be. Hal was instructed by the goddamn White House to lie about the nature of the mission to the pilots, Frank Poole and David Bowman, which was completely contrary to Hal's programming. Hal didn't know how to interpret these contradictory directives, so being an American computer, he went on a killing spree. It's kind of like when you accidentally prompt Siri unknowingly, and then 2 days later you receive an order from Amazon, but a little more intense. Back on Earth, shit's gotten real. Kanye West upstages Taylor Swift at her acceptance speech. Remember that? Oh, and the Soviets ran the blockade, leading to the US sinking the ship, causing the death of Soviet sailors. And in response, an American satellite is destroyed. The Americans aboard the Leonov are ordered back over to the Discovery, and that the two crews are supposed to sever communications, which really sucks because they joined a Discord server together. And now they're facing the two nations going to war, as the two crews separate to their respective ships. The Discovery has enough fuel for a low consumption trajectory, which is how I describe my jogging pace. Dr. Floyd's in the command chair of the Discovery, thinking over his life choices, when Hal relays some creepy text messages saying that the Leonov and Discovery have to leave in 2 days. Floyd replies saying that he cannot take any of these rando texts seriously without knowing who this is, and don't even bother trying to send over a dick pic. Hal relays, "I was once David Bowman." Considering that we now trust that Hal's got the software patch to not kill the crew, Floyd presses back, saying he can't trust that without proof, to which Hal relays,
The response is, I understand. It is important that you believe me. Look behind you.
He turns around and sees that it's none other than David "Open the pod bay doors please Hal" Bowman. In the flesh, looking as chipper and not dead as the day he left the Discovery 9 years earlier, all fresh in his red EVA suit. David leads Floyd into the bay and reiterates, "You must leave in 2 days." Floyd's like, "Why 2 days?" Dave says, "Because something's going to happen." "What's going to happen?" "Something wonderful," David replies. Could you be more specific?" "Like, totally awesome." "Oh, totally awesome? Well, that's great, but we don't have enough fuel to leave in 2 days." "That sounds like a you problem." And David goes all fetal, literally, before disappearing. Floyd then spacewalks over to the Leonov, despite presidential orders and despite the bridge being removed, to tell Hal and Miriam that their long-lost presumed dead astronaut David Bowman says hey, and that they got to make like a tree and get out of here. Unfortunately, she doesn't get the Back to the Future reference. Helen Mirren reminds Floyd that it's impossible for either of their ships to leave because they're not in the right position yet. But Floyd shows her that they can leave if they use the Discovery as a booster and use the Leonov for the trip home. Helen Mirren's impressed by the idea but won't leave for no reason. But when the gigantic monolith that they've been parked by suddenly disappears, Helen says, "Let's make like a Romanian gymnast and split." So they get the band back together, hook up the Discovery to the Leonov, and they prepare to leave. But the calculations have to be precise. So precise that they need an AI to do it. Meaning that they need Hal. But knowing that something so-called wonderful, but likely locally very bad is going to happen, and considering that Hal is self-aware, Dr. Floyd doesn't want Hal to chicken out, so he orders Dr. Chandra to lie to Hal and say that, well, there's no real danger and that the Discovery will rendezvous with a new space station. Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. Dr. Chandra is appalled at the idea of lying to Hal and passionately explains that whether we're based on carbon or silicon, it makes no fundamental difference, and we deserve the respect of being told the truth. As the reunited crew prepare to depart, they notice a black spot suddenly appear on Jupiter. There's no dermatologist on board, and they fear the worst as it keeps growing. Everyone tries to speak calmly because Hal's listening, but it's like trying to maintain a pleasant tone while talking to a moon landing conspiracist. Hal not only senses the tension in their voices, it is fascinated by the black mass forming around Jupiter, which it discovers are actually countless monoliths. Hal requests Chandra to stop the countdown so they may study the phenomenon. Chandra's conflicted, but when Hal asks if he believes that they are in danger, Chandra chooses to have faith in Hal, tells Hal the truth, explaining that they need to leave, and that Hal needs to launch the Discovery in order to save the crew, and that whatever is happening could destroy the Discovery, and Hal with it. There's a prolonged silence when Hal says, "I understand now," and continues with the countdown. Hal thanks Dr. Chandra for telling him the truth before he departs for the Leonov. As the Discovery blasts off with the Leonov in tow, Jupiter starts to collapse. So yeah, some wonderful shit's about to happen. David Bowman makes one last appearance on the Discovery, not to creep, but to ask Hal to relay one last message to Earth, and he stays by Hal's side to the end. Jupiter is fully engulfed in the blackness as it collapses until it explodes. The Discovery is destroyed by the shockwave, and the Leonov is next. Fortunately, between the sturdy Russian design and it being set inside an American movie, they escape the shockwave by the skin of their teeth. And behind them they see something incredible. Jupiter has become a star. It is a holy shit moment, so fundamental that Kanye West apologizes to Taylor Swift. And the US and the Soviets both stand down and recall their ships and planes. And from one of the Leonov screens, we see the message David Bowman had Hal send to the Earth. "All these worlds are yours except Europa. Attempt no landing there. Use them together. Use them in peace." The end. 2010, the year we made contact, was not a box office hit or anything, but it was hands down one of my favorite movies as a kid. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. In 1984, we faced the specter of nuclear annihilation. Pretty much all of the movies set in the near future were either apocalyptic or dystopian at best. Even Star Trek, for all of its hopeful future, was like, yeah, but like in a few hundred years. Even Roddenberry was hedging on the fact that 21st century was going to be a shit show. So it was nice to see a near future that, while precariously tense, was not apocalyptic. I also appreciated how the Soviets were portrayed as something other than sinister commies out for world domination. When it came to the gigantic monolith out in Jovian orbit, we, the Americans and Soviets, are just some no-account primates arriving on a primitive little ship trying to make sense of something far greater than our tribal identities. Sandwiched in between Red Dawn and Rambo First Blood Part 2, 2010 was kind of rather ballsy to make a statement about our shared humanity. Of course, looking back on the other side of the millennium, you can't help but to think that Arthur C. Clarke made some very bold assumptions about the state of human colonization in space by the time of the turn of the millennium with his first movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. You could say he was a little over-optimistic, but can you blame him? Back in 1968, humanity went from having the first artificial satellite orbiting Earth to a manned mission orbiting the moon in the span of 11 years. That's it. At that pace, humanity should have had space stations for leisure, along with regular space travel for regular people by 1999. I remember being in that movie theater and thinking out 26 years in the future, I would be my parents' age. What would I be doing for a living? Would I have a family? All of the other movies set in the near future said I'd likely be an irradiated mutant. But in the end, the real 2010 was somewhere in between the two extremes. We weren't living in a post-apocalyptic hellscape by then, but neither were any of us taking a vacation on the moon. Instead, we were getting acquainted with these new smartphones that connect to the collective knowledge of humanity. Now, you would think that that would make this a better world, yet here we are in the late 2020s, pondering the demise of a once great republic, and powerless in the face of the rise of AI that will likely benefit a very few, while making regular people's lives worse. Author C. Clarke's imagining of an AI was a noble effort in the form of HAL 9000. I mean, sure, HAL was a bit twitchy. You give him some conflicting information and then all of a sudden you're heading for the hills. But part of me would take a well-meaning, albeit slightly homicidal AI over what we have instead. Look, I don't mean to depress you by going over what we all know is a disappointing timeline. If it makes you feel any better, there's plenty of worse timelines out there. There's one where the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't end so well. There's the one where Ringo Starr died in childhood and the Beatles never took off. You laugh, but it takes 4 to make the Beatles. And then there's the one where the national symbol became the turkey, just like Ben Franklin suggested, and we never lived it down. So there's a lot shittier timelines out there. But I get it, it's a bummer. I think about the kid version of me, asking me what it's like on the other side of 2010. The best I can say is that he can stream that movie he loves right onto a device that fits into a pocket. The same device, which is my GPS, my music collection, my mail, and my false connection to the world. I know that author C. Clarke would have some follow-up questions for me. But if he wants me to answer those questions, he first needs to like and subscribe. And with that, I'm going to see you guys next month. Keep listening, and yes, be sure to like and subscribe.